Frequency Podcast Network. Stories that matter, podcasts that resonate.
Not great, but it could have been worse. That's one Economist takeaway on the job market in Canada in 2024. So what does this mean for job seekers in 2025? I'm Kris McCusker, and on this episode of the Big Story podcast, a deep dive on the Canadian labor market, where it's been and where it might be going. Brendon Bernard is senior economist at Indeed. Thanks for doing this.
Thanks for having me.
First, please give us a snapshot on how you saw the job market in Canada in 2024.
On that not great side, it got worse over the year. And really, it was a continuation of a general pattern that we've seen since roughly mid-2022. Just the job market was coming from a really strong place at that point. Now we have sort of 2 years of the gradual deterioration. And so we're starting to see some aspects of the labor market look pretty weak. The weakness, though, of the Canadian labor market is also uneven. Job seekers have really borne the brunt of the weaker labor market. So for people who are comfortably employed in sort of like stable jobs where that they plan to be in for a while, they're actually faring okay. Job security has remained pretty solid, even as the overall labor market has weakened. Where conditions have deteriorated is it's tougher to find a new job. And so this is kind of impacting job seekers at various different points in their career arcs. We can see it among youth, where landing that first job has gotten tougher. So this past November, 25% of 15 to 24-year-olds had never worked before. Over the prior kind of 10 years, it was usually about 20 to 21%. So a noticeable increase in people struggling to land that first job. And then among job seekers who lost their job, it's taking longer for them to find new work. And so reemployment rates have slowed down, seeing the ranks of long-term joblessness, people who've been out of work for over 6 months, that's starting to creep up. And it's not just people who aren't working, trying to find work, who are also finding difficulties. Job hopping also has been pretty slow. So employed job seekers are also facing difficulties. And so the share of Canadian workers who changed employers month to month was really low in November. And job hopping is an important way people advance their careers. And so kind of at all these different stages of job seekers' career arcs and different circumstances in the economy, we're seeing kind of a challenging environment that we need something to change for improvement.
So going forward in 2025, do you expect some of that, all of that, parts of that to change?
Well, we should be cautious because for that to change, the kind of like underlying economy needs to round a corner. One of the key factors kind of like that determines the outlook for job seekers is just how much hiring employers are looking to do. And this is kind of a key part of the weaker trend we've seen over the past few years, that after coming out of the pandemic, employers were looking to hire across the economy. It was a great time to be a job seeker because there were so many job openings. And we've seen that steadily retreat then. So one key ingredient for a rebound for job seekers will be whether employer demand turns around. And that's going to be determined by just the strength of the overall macro economy. So there are some reasons to actually be optimistic. I think a big one is that a key headwind facing the economy over the past 2 or so years has been the impacts of the Bank of Canada rate hikes, which have really changed the fundamentals of the economy. We went from a low interest rate environment for over a decade to one where we had a Bank of Canada rate that levels that we hadn't seen in years. And so this changed the hiring calculus. It changed lots of different aspects of the economy. But we're starting to see that reverse. Not only is the Bank of Canada now cutting rates pretty quickly, actually, those still remain elevated, but just the impacts of that initial shock are also probably going to start to wane. And so that's been kind of a key factor that has, at least until recently, a lot of economists relatively, I'll say, cautiously optimistic about their forecasts for 2025. We're still worried about confidence in the economy and some of the longer term challenges going on. And now we've got this new dose of uncertainty from the prospects of a Canada-US trade war. It's a pretty daunting risk to the economy right now. And so with a new dose of uncertainty thrown in the mix, while there are some reasons to expect the economic cycle to turn, there are also some pretty scary things on the horizon that hopefully won't come to pass. But in the near term, we're kind of left in limbo.
So when you narrow things down a bit, do job seekers in certain sectors or certain parts of the country have better prospects?
Yes, definitely. Talking about like the overall trend in employer hiring appetite, there's a lot of similarities across different areas of the economy. So coming out of the pandemic, it really was quite broad-based how much employers were looking for workers across different regions, different job types. And since about that sort of mid-2022 point, the cool down has also been pretty broad-based as well. But kind of like the extent of the ups and the downs have been a little different, to the point where, like, if we compare how things look compared to, let's say, pre-pandemic, early 2020, before the world went off the rails, there's some areas of the economy where job opportunities are still pretty plentiful and others where they're quite weak. And so we can see a few divides by region as well as by sector. So by region, there are some areas of Canada where the opportunities for work are still pretty plentiful. And it's really the less populated the area you live, generally the better the job posting trends are. So when we look at, for instance, like excluding metropolitan areas generally have populations above 100,000 people, and they're kind of like geographic area. Job postings in those areas in early December this year were still up 26% from where they were in early 2020. They're not as strong as they were in mid 2022, but they're still doing pretty well. But as we kind of like move down the list of metro areas, from the kind of like smaller cities to the larger ones, we see that hiring appetite gets weaker and weaker. Where sort of at the other end of the scale, we have metros like Toronto, Vancouver, as well as a few other cities in southern Ontario, Hamilton, Kitchener, Waterloo, Ottawa. These areas, job postings are down substantially. In many cases, down about 20% compared to their pre-pandemic levels. And so the kind of strength of the labor market job seekers are entering into in 2025 is at least in part dependent on where they're looking. There's also definite contrasts across different sectors as well. So one area of the economy where a hiring appetite really marches to the beat of its own drum is in healthcare. It highlights a major challenge for the Canadian healthcare system. But for job seekers, if you got the skills and background for jobs in healthcare, whether it's nursing or whether it's jobs in the dental field or medical technicians or doctors, there are jobs out there for you. And so healthcare is a real standout sector in terms of strength. But there are also other areas of the economy where it's still a pretty good time to be looking for work. Engineering, another pretty good one. Engineering job postings were still up 19% compared to early 2020. Also, some white collar areas of the economy. So management, legal services, accounting. These areas are more in like the range of like 10% increases, but still holding up okay. Not as strong as they were. It's not the same job seekers market, but there's still opportunities out there for job seekers. as we move down the kind of like list, we're starting to get into areas of the economy where finding work is much tougher. And a few of those areas where things stand out as weak. One of those is in the world of sales. Job postings and sales quite weak. Also, retail and certain customer service related positioning. There's not a lot of opportunity there. We're talking in declines in the range of 15 to 20% compared to early 2020. It's also not a great time to be looking for work in marketing, marketing and communications and the art. And one last area of weakness that is a little unique among all these categories is it's not a great market to be a job seeker in tech. So tech is an interesting case because if we go back to mid 2022, among all the categories I've listed so far, job postings in tech were furthest above their pre-pandemic levels. So there really was a boom in Canadian tech hiring. But since then, there's been like a major shift in the tech hiring landscape. Layoffs have been what has caught most of the headlines in the tech sector over the past few years, but it's really the hiring freezes that have been the more dramatic shift. And so these days, after a few great years, it's not as good a time to be looking for a job in areas like software.
For a long time, we heard everything was about artificial intelligence. So it sounds like the opportunities are not just centered on artificial intelligence as we go into 2025.
We definitely see areas like generative AI actually growing quite quickly. Job postings mentioning Gen AI are rising at a really rapid clip, but they're just a small share of the overall job market. The number of employers and the number of businesses in the landscape is a key determinant of just how many job openings out there. Since the pandemic rebound ended, just the number of businesses in the Canadian economy has flatlined. And so it's tough to have a great job seekers market when the number of actual employers isn't expanding at a solid pace.
And so looking ahead, you say immigration policy will play a crucial role in our job market.
Canadian population growth is set to whiplash from basically a record 2-year pace to, if things go as expected, a standstill. And the standstill isn't really going to come so much from fewer people receiving permanent residency in Canada. There's going to be a little bit of that. But the main change that's going to happen is a major whiplash in just the population of non-permanent residents in Canada. So non-permanent residents, people, foreign students, people on temporary work visas, these groups have been the main source of Canada's soaring population growth over the past few years. And their ranks are expected to shrink in the coming year. And I think actually in some ways we're already seeing this on Indeed. One of the initial stages of the hiring process where job seekers and employers come together has already seen a shift. So we track, for instance, the share of job seeker activity on Canadian job postings coming from abroad. And sort of in the years leading up to the more recent population surge, about like 6% of clicks on Canadian job postings came from job seekers located outside of the country. And then over the 2 years between 2021 and 2023, we saw that share soar to over 14% by mid-2023. More recently, though, since mid-2023, that's come almost all the way back down to about 7% of clicks as of November. But there are some wild cards as well. And the real wild card, it doesn't just relate to the labor market, but it's kind of relates to just like how this policy is going to be, these policies are going to be implemented in general, is around what happens to all the people who are in Canada with expiring work and study visas. And what are the labor market impacts of those folks going to be if and when they start leaving And just in general, there's going to be some chaos more broadly. While non-permanent residents are often working in sort of like lower paying areas of the service sector where there's often higher turnover, you've got people on postgraduate work permit who are working in jobs all across the economy. In some cases, in like roles that are pretty crucial to their companies, where just backfilling a position is not necessarily going to be straightforward. And so there's going to be some dislocation effects, and it's going to be really challenging for these folks themselves as well. And I think this is just like a sort of like a consequence of such dramatic shifts in policy that it's naturally going to cause some chaos, and sort of like how it ultimately plays out in 2025. That remains to be seen, but it's clearly going to be like cause some challenges in pockets of the labor market. But how broad based that is, that's kind of something that's more up in the air.
And listeners can find your report at hiringlab.org. Thanks so much for doing this. I really appreciate your insight.
Thanks for having me. Please feel free to reach out at any time.
Brendon Bernard is senior economist at Indeed. That's it for this episode of the Big Story podcast. You can send us feedback on this episode or any other by emailing us at hello@thebigstorypodcast.ca. I'm Kris McCusker. Thanks for listening.